Good afternoon, everyone. My name is McLean Bearhopt. I'm the Associate Executive Director at the network. Thank you so much for attending our net workshop today to learn more about COVID-19 vaccines and the vaccination process. We're really honored today to be joined by Dr. William Fisher, who is the Deputy Director for Vaccine Coordination at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Dr. Fisher has been helping spearhead vaccine distribution in the city and has been a phenomenal resource to the network and our members as we navigate this new landscape for our tenants and staff. Dr. Fisher will be doing a presentation this afternoon focused on what vaccines are, vaccine equity, vaccine development and monitoring, and specifically COVID-19 vaccine distribution. After his presentation, he'll be able to answer specific questions you all may have. So please type your questions in the Q&A as he's presenting, and we'll try to address as many as possible. Take it away, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you, McLean. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, great. So we're going to talk about COVID-19 vaccines. We'll start with a little bit of background. Let me just outline what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about where we are, what are vaccines, how are they developed and monitored, specifically about COVID-19 vaccines, about vaccine distribution, and about getting vaccinated. So, where we are. As you all know at this point, COVID-19 is a disease caused by coronavirus. It first appeared in December 2019. That's why it's COVID-19 and not COVID-20. It's spread mainly through respiratory droplets that enter the air when people sneeze or talk or sing or breathe. Symptoms appear 2 to 14 days after exposure and include fever, cough, shortness of breath, loss of taste and smell, headache, and sore throat. Some people have no symptoms at all, and people without symptoms can spread the virus. And of course, there are other symptoms. I'm just mentioning the most common ones. From an equity point of view, we know that there are inequities. We know that more Black and Latino people have been sick, have been hospitalized, and have died from COVID than other racial and ethnic groups. We know that these differences in health outcomes are due to long-term structural racism, including policies and discriminatory practices that prevent communities of color from accessing vital resources such as healthcare, housing, and food, opportunities that are lacking in these communities such as employment and education, and that negatively affects overall well-being, and that the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on New Yorkers of color highlights how these inequities negatively influence health outcomes. Our approach involves a commitment to equity. In our approach at DOHMH and in the city in general, equity is central to our COVID response and vaccine program. We must earn trust, build confidence, deliver community-focused information and programming, and community involvement and partnerships are key. We are committed that we will take action to address health and social inequities that have been amplified by COVID-19, and we will provide facts and information that people need to make informed decisions about vaccination. So this is where we are as of this morning. About 1.5 million doses have been received in New York City. That is a combination of first dose and second dose. Almost 711,000 people have received their first dose, and over 190,000 people have received their second dose. Here is where we are in terms of daily reported cases. And as you can see, we had a lull over the summer and into the fall, and then in the late fall, early winter, we entered our second wave, which is hopefully at this point now stabilizing and maybe even beginning a little bit of decline. You can also see from the map on the right that COVID testing positivity is not evenly distributed among zip codes, and that some zip codes are more highly affected than others. So in terms of staying safe, these are the steps that people need to take. They need to stay home if they are sick, or if they recently tested positive or were exposed. They need to keep physical distances 6 feet away from others, wear a face covering at all times. When you're with others, you can be contagious even without symptoms. Keep your hands clean, get tested, and learn more about vaccines, and that's what we're here for today. So, what are vaccines? Vaccines help the body develop immunity or protection from a disease so that the body can defend against the disease if it's exposed. There are many different types of vaccines. Vaccines work by, one, either preventing people from getting symptoms and complications from a disease, or preventing people from getting disease in the first place. It's important that vaccines save lives. They help protect the people who get the vaccine, and sometimes also can protect the people around them, even entire communities. No vaccine works 100% of the time, and some people can't be vaccinated because of medical conditions or because a vaccine has not been approved for some groups. And that's why it's important for as many people as can get vaccinated to protect themselves and others around them. What do we know about COVID vaccines? And we'll be going into a lot more detail on that. But the top line points is that they are safe and effective, that they are available to New Yorkers at no cost, that they are available to people of all immigration status, and that vaccination is not a public benefit under the public charge rule, and that when people are vaccinated, their privacy will be protected. Developing vaccines alone does not prevent disease. People getting vaccinated prevents disease and saves lives. Let's talk a little about how vaccines are developed and how they're monitored. So there are 4 phases of vaccine clinical trials. Each studies whether the vaccine works and is safe. Phase 1 is usually a very small trial, less than 100. Phase 2 increases to several hundred. Phase 3 to thousands, and those are the trials on which authorization is based. And then after approval, phase 4 continues studies monitoring the vaccine after it's available to the public. Vaccines must be reviewed and authorized by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, before they can be used. The FDA monitors vaccine development from beginning to end, analyzes clinical trial data to decide whether to allow the vaccine to be used, and continues to monitor the vaccine safety data even after the vaccine is approved. In an emergency like this one, the FDA may allow vaccines to be used before they are officially licensed by issuing what's called an emergency use authorization, or EUA, so they can be used right away. It's really important to understand that there are no shortcuts in the testing of the vaccines allowed. All vaccines issued an EUA must go through the same clinical trials as all other vaccines. And the EUA can only be issued if the evidence strongly suggests that the benefits outweigh any risks to patients. There are a number of federal agencies in addition to the FDA and a number of external organizations that continue to monitor vaccine safety during trials and as part of ongoing evaluations after vaccines are approved. You can see the list of them on the slide. There are a lot of people keeping an eye on this process and a lot of organizations. And providers are required to report certain adverse events to the vaccine adverse reporting system. Now let's talk about COVID vaccines specifically. Scientists built on a lot of years of research from other vaccines, including research on vaccines for other coronaviruses when they were building these vaccines. The federal government provided special funding to allow development, testing, and production to happen at the same time, and that was Operation Warp Speed. Companies started manufacturing vaccines so that they would be ready to distribute them if an EUA was issued. Normally, the company would wait to see if the vaccine was authorized, then ramp up production, which would add a lot of time to the process. The federal government, state and local governments, and healthcare providers have been working for months to plan for storage, distribution, supplies, and other logistics. 2 vaccines have been authorized by the FDA for use and are currently available: the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccine and the Moderna mRNA vaccine. Other vaccines are in various stages of testing, and those include the Johnson & Johnson Janssen DNA vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Novavax protein-based vaccine, and the Sanofi GlaxoSmithKline protein-based vaccine. So since the 2 approved vaccines are mRNA or messenger RNA vaccines, let's talk about how they work. The mRNA vaccines contain genetic material from the COVID-19 virus. mRNA vaccines do not contain the actual virus. Here's how they work. So the mRNA enters the body with instructions on how to make a protein that is part of the virus that causes COVID-19. The proteins that are produced by the body in response to the mRNA vaccine trigger the body to make antibodies and other defenses. The mRNA is then broken down and destroyed by the body. But now you have antibodies, so if the person is later exposed to COVID-19, the body is now able to recognize the virus and produce antibodies to fight it. One way to think of it is as an email, which contains instructions on how to fight a threat, and then the email deletes itself. Now, both vaccines were studied intensively in phase 3 clinical trials, and both vaccines were shown to be safe and effective across all gender, age, race, and ethnicity groups. Both vaccines prevented sickness or severe COVID-19 in over 94% of study volunteers. So for the Pfizer vaccine, the number of participants in trials were 44,000. Of those participants, 26% were Latino, 10% Black, 4% Asian. There were no differences in effectiveness or side effects between the different races and ethnic groups. For the Moderna vaccine, over 30,000 participated in the US. Again, 20% Latino, 10% Black, 5% Asian. Again, no differences in efficacy or side effects among the different racial and ethnic groups. The Pfizer vaccine was approved for people 16 years and older, and the Moderna for people 18 years and older. So there's some things, of course, that we still don't know about these vaccines. We don't know how long protection from the vaccine will last, because COVID and the vaccines themselves haven't been around long enough to determine that. We don't know whether additional doses will be needed in the future. that is booster shots. We don't know whether the vaccine is safe and effective for children, but trials of these vaccines in children are beginning and getting underway. We don't know whether being vaccinated prevents people from carrying and spreading the virus to other people, even though they're not getting sick. And we don't know what other vaccines are going to be available in the coming months and how effective they'll be, but we will find out as they get approved. Vaccine distribution. New York State determines how groups are prioritized for vaccination and the timeline for distribution. That's based on CDC guidance. CDC is the Centers for Disease Control. People at increased risk of getting COVID-19 or at increased risk of severe COVID illness are being prioritized. Currently eligible categories include healthcare workers, people 65 and older, residents and staff in nursing homes, homeless shelters, and certain other group living facilities, and certain frontline essential workers such as first responders, teachers, school staff, transit workers, and grocery store workers. Additional essential workers are being prioritized all the time, and you may have noted recently that taxi and livery drivers were added to the priority groups. People with certain underlying medical conditions are another group to be prioritized. This phased distribution will take time, and we don't expect vaccines to be widely available to everybody until the middle of 2021. You can visit our website for the current list of eligible groups because it changes all the time as additional groups are added. So, how are we ensuring equitable access to vaccines? Number one, we're opening vaccine sites that are our city-run hubs or pods in communities most impacted by COVID-19. We're ensuring that New York City communities receive clear and up-to-date information and resources in languages spoken in those communities to help people make decisions about vaccines. We're partnering with many, many community-based organizations, clinical partners, and community leaders. We're listening and responding to community concerns and input. We're speaking openly about what we know and what we don't know. And we're monitoring data and community feedback to identify gaps in access and where we need to focus our resources. In terms of getting vaccinated, it's important to remember, again, that there is strong evidence that the vaccines are safe and effective, that they protect you from COVID-19, which can have serious health consequences for people of all ages. People of all ages have been hospitalized and have died from this illness. And some people continue to have health problems even after they are no longer sick. We know that it may protect the people around you, but we're still waiting final word on that. And it helps us move closer to ending this public health emergency and returning to life as we remember it. Children under 16 years old cannot be vaccinated at this time, but as I mentioned, studies have started in this group. All other groups can be vaccinated. For some groups, such as pregnant or breastfeeding people, there is limited information about the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines. These groups can still choose to be vaccinated. People in these groups can speak with their healthcare provider if they have questions about whether the vaccine is right for them. So where are people getting vaccinated? Some people who, for instance, are hospital workers or work in a federally qualified health center may be getting vaccinated right at work. they can get vaccinated through their employers. This might include also nursing homes. People can get vaccinated at our city-run sites. We call them pods. I believe the public name is hubs, and we've opened them in all 5 boroughs. People can get vaccinated at healthcare facilities and as pharmacies as they gradually come on board. And people can always go to our vaccine finder to find a vaccine site near them and make an appointment. What you need to do in terms of getting the vaccine: first, make sure you're eligible. You can go to our website to make sure you're in an eligible group. Schedule an appointment with the vaccine finder. Complete the New York State vaccine form. And then get vaccinated. When you get vaccinated, you have to bring proof of eligibility and, of course, wear a face covering, as you always should, and then make an appointment for your second dose. This is the vaccine finder, the way it looks. You can type in a zip code, it brings up a map. Each site manages their own schedules and appointments, so the locator provides links to those scheduling sites and phone numbers. And appointments are available, dependent on vaccine supply. The vaccine offers some protection, but it offers much more protection after a second dose. The vaccine's maximally effective 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose. The second dose should always be the same vaccine as your first dose. For example, if your first dose was Pfizer, your second dose should be Pfizer. The schedule for a second dose is between 21 to 42 days after your first dose, that's for the Pfizer, or between 28 to 42 days after the first dose, that's for the Moderna. You'll get a vaccination card when you get the first dose, and you can bring that with you when you go for your second dose. Side effects. Side effects with vaccines are very common. Most people report some side effects, which are usually normal signs that your body is building protection. Common side effects are soreness or swelling on the arm where you got the shot, headache, body aches, tiredness, and fever. Side effects are usually mild to moderate. They usually start within the first 3 days after getting the shot, with the day after the shot most common. They usually last about a day, maybe 2 days. They're more common after the second shot, and they're less common in older adults. If you have side effects that concern you or don't go away, you should call your healthcare provider. You can also talk to your healthcare provider about taking Advil or Tylenol to relieve pain or discomfort. What's really important is that even if you have some of these mild to moderate side effects from the first shot, you should get the second shot. Allergic reactions. If you have ever had an allergic reaction to a vaccine or an injection, then you should talk to your healthcare provider before considering getting the vaccine. Other types of allergies like food, pet, dust, pollen, latex are not a concern for this vaccination. Allergic reactions usually start within minutes to an hour of getting the shot. They may include difficulty breathing, swelling of your face and throat, a fast heartbeat, a rash all over your body, dizziness, or weakness. That is why people are generally asked to stay 15 to 30 minutes at the place they got vaccinated after the vaccine. If you think you're having a severe reaction, call 911 or go to the nearest hospital. It's important to remember that these allergic reactions are extremely rare and are unlike the common allergic reactions that are seen with vaccines such as the sore arm or feeling a little feverish or a headache. After you're vaccinated, you have to continue to stay home. If you're sick, stay 6 feet away from others, wear a face covering when outside your home, and wash your hands often. Why? You're saying, I got vaccinated, I shouldn't have to do this stuff anymore. Well, 2 reasons. One, as effective as they are, the COVID vaccines are not 100% effective. And therefore, you may still be vulnerable to COVID, even though the chances are much, much, much smaller. Also, we still need to learn about how long the protection from the vaccine lasts and whether you can still carry and transmit COVID without getting sick even after having the vaccine. And of course, as we're able to ease up on this guidance about preventive measures, we'll keep people informed. So practice prevention strategies, get tested, take care of your mental health, amplify important messages like getting vaccinated, help people share their stories, and go to our website for accurate information. Thank you. Okay. I'm back.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fisher. As always, really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through sort of the details of all the different aspects of this. We do have some questions that have been coming in through chat or through the Q&A. And I'll just ask, if you do have questions, if you could put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, that will help sort of just organize. I'm going to kind of just go from the top down and we'll get through as many as we can. So the first question we have is, how is it that, I think you mentioned earlier that vaccine information is kept privately, but people are having to utilize a COVID vaccination form. So can you speak to a little bit on the back end of of the privacy issues here?
Sure. That form, you're probably talking about the state attestation form. That is confidential, that's kept by the state in a confidential data system and is not available to the public. But aggregate data, like how many grocery clerks, how many taxi drivers, how many people who are residents of congregate settings, stuff like that, in the aggregate is released, but individual data is not.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. Thank you. There's a question about the 2 vaccines that are currently available. There's something called luciferase, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Do you know anything about that? Or could you expound upon that?
I'm not sure what's being referred to. Sorry.
Okay. In regards to children, of being the group who cannot get the vaccine at the moment, could you speak to some ideas around what could be done to protect them from the virus, since people of all ages are affected?
Yeah.
Children.
So I think the 2 biggest things we can do to protect our children from the virus is, 1, if you're eligible, get vaccinated as soon as you can. And 2, keep following that core 4, that if we can all follow the masking, the social distancing, the staying home if we're sick, the frequent hand washing, we're going to protect our children and our communities. And so, as you know, the schools have been thinking a lot about this in terms of their, when to reopen, when not to reopen, how often to test and things like this. But I think those basic public health measures, plus getting vaccinated if you can, is the best way to protect your whole family.
Mm-hmm. A couple questions around allergies. Folks that are asking specifically about, having allergies themselves and concerns around the 2 that are available now. Are there side effects associated with that if they're allergic to penicillin, for example, and
no,
have severe reactions to it? Any concerns around that?
No concerns around penicillin allergies. But again, for your own peace of mind, always helpful to talk to your healthcare professional. But there are no concerns around penicillin allergies.
Great. This is a question around timing. So if someone, gets the first dose, but then the second dose isn't available because, it's scarce at the moment, can you speak a little bit to that? Like what would happen if someone got the first and couldn't get the second within that time frame that is recommended? What would be your advice around that?
So, first of all, the CDC has increased the time frame to up to 6 weeks after the first dose, which is great. Secondly, I just want to point out that we're still reserving a second dose for every single person who got a first dose. So no second doses are being used as first doses. So in other words, no matter how scarce the vaccine is at the moment, right, it's still, if you got a first dose, there's an allocation for a second dose for you. Now, unless the federal government changes policy on that, that's the way it will be. Whether you get it, what we now know is that it's not a make or break thing that you get it on day 28. You can get it up to 6 weeks later. And for instance, of the people who've been vaccinated who are vaccinated in the city hubs who were eligible for second dose, over 92% have gotten their second dose, and we're making sure to reach out to the rest. So there's no shortage of vaccine for second dose.
And as a follow-up to that, I know this came up on the last time we had this webinar Q&A. Have there been issues where someone goes to one particular hub, or to a clinic, they run out of it and they have to go to a second location? Like, is that happening? Should people be aware of that possibility? Is it okay if that happens?
From a scientific point of view, it's okay, but the state has strongly said that they would want people to get their second dose in the same place that they got their first dose.
Okay.
So if that hub can't accommodate you on exactly day 28, don't worry. You have up to 6 weeks to get that second dose. Just keep trying for a second dose appointment a little later. No harm done.
Okay, at that location.
At that location.
Okay.
That's not a city policy, that's a state policy.
Okay. Is this vaccine, is it been determined if it will be the sort of thing like the flu shot where we have to get it every year?
That's a great question. We don't really know. A lot of that is going to depend on how successful the virus is at mutating and at producing new variants every year, and then how successful the basic vaccine is in dealing with those variants. The reason we have to get a flu vaccine every year is that the predominant strain of flu is generally different from one year to the next. So we don't know that yet.
Okay. And do you know what is determining like who gets the Pfizer and who gets the Moderna? Like what the decision is behind that?
Mostly logistics. The Pfizer has to be stored in these ultra cold freezers that generally only hospitals have. So likely if you get the vaccine in a hospital, it may well be Pfizer. Pretty much everyone else is using the Moderna because they don't have Moderna can be stored in a regular freezer and doesn't require the ultra cold storage.
Okay. There's a question on here about how do health providers know they are vaccinating only people who test negative? I'm not clear on this question specifically. My understanding was that if you tested positive, you still should be getting the
vaccine.
Could you speak a little bit to this issue?
Sure.
Confusion around this.
So the recommendation is to get the vaccine, whether you've ever had COVID or not. If you actively have COVID, the recommendation is to wait until your isolation period is over. And you can, if you want, wait for up to 90 days to get the vaccine, because we know that at least probably for 90 days, you've got pretty active antibodies from having had COVID. If you were exposed to COVID but didn't, but are just having to quarantine but don't actually get sick, as soon as your quarantine is over, you can go get the vaccine.
Okay. This question, so no vaccine passport is needed. Could you speak to what is needed to show that you are eligible for the vaccine?
So it kind of depends on your category. If you're, so since we're talking to the supportive housing network. So if you're going in as an employee, either an employee ID or a letter from your employer, or some kind of pay stub or would work. If you're going in as a resident, then the best thing to have is a letter from the residential provider stating that you're a resident of the congregate housing program.
Okay, great. This is a question around technology. What happens if a recipient that wants to get the vaccine doesn't have a smartphone? Is there other options?
Yes, there is a call center, and that number is on our website, and you can call them and they'll make the appointment for you.
Okay.
And almost all, that's for the city-run pods or hubs. Almost all the other providers also list a phone number in addition to a link, so you can always call.
Okay. This is a question around, all the articles we're reading about the mutations. Is there any advice or would you suggest that people wait to get the vaccine to see how these mutations play out, or would you encourage people to be getting it now? Any advantage to waiting?
There is no advantage to waiting. Get it now. If it turns out that some kind of booster is necessary because of a specific mutation, then getting it now will not interfere with that, with getting that booster. But and both the vaccines have shown substantial effectiveness against all the mutations that are out there so far. Maybe not as quite as high effectiveness against the South African mutation, but still far more than placebo effectiveness.
Okay, that's good. That's excellent to know. Could you speak a little bit? I know you did mention this in the presentation, but could you speak again to the fertility, the impact on fertility for those trying to conceive?
There is zero evidence and zero theoretical reason to believe that these vaccines will have any impact on fertility.
Okay. After someone gets the second dose, is there an understanding at this point in time of how long, people, once they're vaccinated, how long it lasts for, how long they're protected?
We don't know yet. Just because they haven't been around long enough, they haven't even been in trials long enough for us to know that. The hope will be that it will be a long-term protection, but we don't know for a fact yet how long protection will last.
Someone is asking, they gave a lot number. What does that mean? And are they supposed to use the same lot number vial for a second dose?
No, the lot number is just the batch of vaccine that your vaccine came from. The same way medicine also has a lot number. All vaccines, when you get them, They also write down what the lot number is in case there's a recall, in case there's a vaccine, say lot number 4255 had a manufacturing issue that made it not as effective. So maybe they know exactly who got lot number 4655. They can get in touch with them and do whatever is necessary, maybe another vaccine, whatever it is.
Okay.
So that's routine with any vaccine, that the lot number is recorded. Your second dose will come from a different lot because that lot will have been long used up by the time you get your second dose.
Okay. This is another question around timing. If for some reason the second dose is not given in within that 6-week period that you mentioned, so do they have to start at square one and
No,
get this dose again?
yeah. The guidance is still just get it as soon as you can get it. The only reason is we don't know. This wasn't studied. So we don't know for sure beyond that period, but there's no reason to think that it wouldn't be perfectly effective, even if you got them at a longer interval apart. You should not go back to square one.
Okay, that's great news.
Yeah.
This is around research. You mentioned earlier that that COVID-19 vaccine had been researched for many years, but not really trailed until recently. Can you talk a little bit about how how is it determined the long-term outcomes if something has only sort of been tracked recently?
So I don't know if I misspoke or someone misheard. Vaccines have been studied for years in coronaviruses, not for instance, the virus that causes SARS or the virus that causes MERS, but not in COVID-19 itself because COVID-19 wasn't discovered until December of 2019. So the way that people track long-term side effects is the vaccine has to be around for a while, and then they do what's called post-marketing surveillance. Side effects are reported, phase 4 studies are done, and so yes, there is no way at this point for this vaccine for us to know about long-term side effects. It hasn't been around long enough, but there haven't been long-term side effects with vaccines in general of any kind. So this would be highly unlikely.
Okay. I think we covered this, but just we have time, so I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. This person actually had a fact sheet from the hospital where they got the Pfizer vaccine, and it said it can be given 17 to 42 days. They gave an appointment for 18 days later. Sounds like that would be okay, right? It'd be within the time frame.
Yeah, Pfizer is technically 21 with a grace period on the early side. So that would be 18 would be fine.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about the science behind people testing positive up to 90 days after isolation? So this is that after they've,
So this is generally on antibody tests. Antibody tests generally are not good at measuring whether you have COVID. They're good at measuring whether you ever have had COVID. So people who are testing, positive for antibodies, once they've had COVID, they will test positive for antibodies for quite a while. There are some people who are immune compromised who may shed the actual virus longer than the typical 7 to 10 days after symptoms, but that's rare.
Okay. This is a little bit a question around the stigma. There's been an increased amount of people that are afraid of taking the vaccine due to the influences from unreliable sources of information. Do you have any advice or guidance? Like, how can we address, folks on this? Is there any particular source that people could refer others to outside of like the websites that we've mentioned here today? Do you know of any other campaigns or?
The CDC website is fabulous. Any reputable medical website, you know, Kaiser or, you know, any of the big medical websites will all have this COVID information. The best way, I think, to address this is not just to refer people to websites, but actually to name the myths and discuss them. You know, if someone tells you that they heard that, you know, there's a microchip in there and that they're, you know, going to track you, you know, just address that, you know, that no, there is no microchip in the vaccine. I think it's important to listen to what people's concerns are. Some of them are based on inaccurate information. Some of them are based on an understandable suspicion of medical authorities, and that we see that particularly among people of color who have been ill-used by medical authorities for many years. And for those hesitancies, I just point out, look at the studies, substantial numbers of people of color in the studies, and no difference in efficacy or side effects between white people and people of color. And so this was not a vaccine that was just tested on white people and now is going to be, you know, given to people of color too. So that's an important thing also. But I think if you be respectful and just answer the myths and questions, yeah. I mean, there are some people who are just not gonna do it. That's their privilege. But a lot of people are more uncertain than they are really anti, or they're hesitant. And those people, I think, do, you know, well with more information and also personal stories. I mean, I can tell you, I got the vaccine. I happened to get the Pfizer because I got it at a hospital because I'm an old guy. And, you know, I had a sore arm after dose 1. I felt kind of fluey for a day after dose 2, and that was it. And I'm so happy I was able to get it, you know.
That's great. I also do want to mention we are recording this this webinar today, and we'll be sending out to all of the attendees. So if you find it useful, particularly this back and forth Q&A questions, and you want to share with your tenants and staff, I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, is really just to help answer people's questions and fears, and just to help educate our community on what they should know about this decision. So please.
And I do have to add then on behalf of the Department of Health that if you use this recording, please let people know the information in it is accurate and current as of February 5th, 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about this earlier, but could you just restate again, you know, all the different mutations, the thought around this vaccine, and it is considered now effective, right, for all the current mutations being discussed?
It is considered effective for all the current mutations. It is probably less effective on the South African mutation than it is on the unmutated virus, but again, much more effective than not getting the shot at all.
This is another research question just around the long-term side effects. Do you have a sense of when long-term side effects are going to be started to be studied, and when?
Oh, I think studies are ongoing.
Research on that?
Yeah, these are the phase 4 studies that I mentioned. And, you know, as long as a vaccine is in use, people are looking to see if there are any long-term side effects. But again, our record with vaccines has been not seeing late appearing side effects that appear years after you get the vaccine.
Yeah.
We just haven't seen that with vaccines in general.
And the same person asked, what is considered long-term? Is there a definition around that?
I don't think so. I think people use it to mean things that appear sometime later after getting the vaccine rather than appearing immediately or within days.
Okay. Is there a time frame as to when the vaccine will be FDA approved?
I don't know the answer to that. Having the approval process, the level of testing is no different for an EUA than for FDA approval. It's just a bureaucratic process. When it will be officially licensed by the FDA, I don't know, because the important thing is that it's out there now, so that takes some of the pressure off to do that. So I don't know when that'll happen.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't wait on that. It's not going to make a bit of difference. The research has been done and the results are in. So there's no reason to wait around for that if you can get it. Yeah.
I also have been interested in this question. Has there been a significant number of people who have caught COVID-19 repeatedly?
Not a large number, but there is a small number. Generally, it's defined as if you, within a certain period of time, it's considered a recurrence, and after that, it's considered you got it again. It's quite rare, quite rare. Mm-hmm. But again, as we go out more time, right? Most people, it hasn't been that long. Most people who've had COVID, it hasn't been all that long since they had it because COVID hasn't been around that long. We don't know if people a year later will be more apt to catch it again.
Right.
We don't know that.
There's a couple questions here. So I want to mention it. Of reading about people that are taking the vaccine and then passing away, like dying from taking it. Can you speak to this? Have you heard about this? Is there any information around this?
There was you may be referring to something that was reported out of somewhere in Scandinavia. It may have been Finland, I'm not sure. Where a group of the mortality rate after vaccination was considered to be unusually high. This was in a group of nursing home residents, I believe, whose age was somewhere in the upper 90s with lots of underlying medical conditions. So it's not at all clear that the vaccine had anything to do with their deaths.
Okay. Data-wise, at the city, are you seeing a lot of people that are getting the first dose, but then not getting the second dose? Like, does there seem to be confusion around that?
No, we're getting great response on the second dose, and at least if you got vaccinated at one of the city hubs and you don't make an appointment for a second dose, the city tracks you down and offers you, to make that appointment. Mm-hmm. There are also a lot of, as the rollout continues and the technology gets better, a lot of places where you get the vaccine let you make your second dose appointment right then and there, or you get an email the next day to make it. The hospital where I got my first dose sent me an email within hours with a link to schedule my second dose. And I know the city hubs now, before you leave after your first dose, you make your second dose appointment. So it's getting tighter, but we have not seen that. We've seen really good response on second doses.
Okay. Will providers let you know which vaccine that they're using on you, the Pfizer or Moderna?
Sure. I mean, if they don't, you can always ask. But again, if you get it in an outpatient facility of some kind, or at a a hub or a pod, chances are it's Moderna. But you can always
Okay.
ask, and they will absolutely tell you. Plus, your little vaccine card that you get will tell you whether it was Moderna or Pfizer.
Okay. This is a really excellent question. Once you take the vaccine, can you still spread it? Like after you get through both doses, can you still spread?
This is the $64,000, I guess now with inflation, the $64 million question. We just don't know yet. Why don't we know? Because the studies on the vaccine were done with the endpoint of did the person get sick after they took the vaccine or not. They were not done with the endpoint of testing everybody to see if they were carrying virus. So we don't know whether you can be what's called an asymptomatic carrier after you get the vaccine. Hopefully we'll know that soon, and that will enable us to give much better guidance to people.
And then we've got one more question, and then I think we're gonna have to call it because we're at time already. This is a question around cerebral palsy, reading about, getting cerebral palsy after taking the vaccine. Is this something that you've heard about or aware of?
No, cerebral palsy is generally defined as an anoxic birth injury, that is, from a lack of oxygen around the time of birth. So it wouldn't be cerebral palsy, but I haven't heard of any kind of severe neurological complications from getting the vaccine.
Okay. Great. Well, we are going to have to cut it off. Appreciate your time as always, Dr. Fisher, and just willingness to go through and answer questions. I want to mention to folks that we will have these slides available. They will be dated today. Things change, so we want to stay up to date. But we will be sending it around to everyone who attended and registered, as well as a recording of this. So we hope it was helpful, and always reach out to us if you have questions that we can help facilitate, as this process continues. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Fisher, for spending this afternoon with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the terrific questions.
Great, thanks. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.